Mr. Chairman, I don't know if you're familiar with the economic news for America that's come out recently, particularly with respect to our deficit and debt, but it's taken a decided turn for the worst. The first quarter numbers reflect that our revenues went up 4%, but our spending went up 7%. According to the Congressional Budget Office, relying on Treasury Department numbers, our first quarter deficit was $36 billion worse in this fiscal year compared to the previous fiscal year. If that were extrapolated out, that would mean that our deficit has gone up $144 billion worse this year than the previous fiscal year, although the CBO projects that it will probably be more likely in the $130-something billion range worse. The CBO is also projecting that our total amount of debt is now going to blow through the $30 trillion mark within a decade. And the real question is whether America is going to be able to survive that, whether we will go through a debilitating insolvency and bankruptcy. So with that as a little bit of an economic background as to our country's finances, my question to you is, how do we avoid a repeat of the Constellation program's demise in 2010 at the hands of the Obama administration? And a corollary to that is, what lessons did we learn, and how can we apply what we learned to the Space Launch System and the Orion programs? The floor is yours.
I'll take a crack. The budget numbers that you talked about, the economic numbers, are sobering. So I don't want to dismiss them at all. If I would look at myself personally, I would call myself a fiscal conservative. So I worry about those kinds of numbers. I equally worry about what great nations do. And I think great nations do great things. And so I think that relative to the country as a whole, as we go through challenging economic times or challenging whatever times there may be, I think that we are fortunate that we live in a country that has the ability to also do great things while we're meeting these challenges. So I put myself in that category of advocating working today's problem and planning for great things for the future. Relative again, and I'm being a little bit redundant, nothing troubles me more than to spend a reasonable amount of money, to come back to maybe my crazy analogy earlier, for another tombstone. And that's why I personally am passionate about humans to Mars, but I'm equally passionate about a good, disciplined plan that is not frivolous. And one of my colleagues commented, a plan that does what is required, but is also does not do what is not required, or maybe another way to say it, doesn't just do what is possible. So a disciplined, structured plan that accomplishes what I'm calling what a great nation does a great thing is important. And maybe naive, but it's my belief that such a plan, well constructed in a bipartisan, I guess, kind of an effort, I think that kind of a plan should be stable across administrations. And if we as a country can't do things like that across administrations, when they're well thought out and well done, then shame on us.
Mr. Young, let me please interrupt. We're running short of time, so if either of the other two gentlemen would also like to respond, please feel free to do so.
Well, I'd like to reiterate Mr. Young's point that probably we're going to spend $180 billion on human space flight in the country over the coming horizons, unless that just stops altogether. Let's spend the money as wisely as we can. You could make an argument, and some do, and I have from time to time, that maybe we shouldn't have human space flight, that we ought to rely entirely on robotic probes, which are much more cost-effective for the scientific knowledge that's adduced. That's a choice that in really grim financial straits the country might be forced to make. But it doesn't seem to be something that people want to stand up and proudly say, let's end the human space endeavor and rely on only robots. Although the robots stuff is pretty cool. Mars, Pluto, etc.
I'll make this very brief, but we're compelled to be present in space for a variety of reasons. Modern civilization critically depends on the assets in cislunar space. So what I've tried to envision is a way to make the human program relevant to those critical needs. And what I've identified is the fact that if you go to the moon and develop its resources to create a permanent transportation system that can access not only low Earth orbit, but all the points in between Earth and moon, you've actually created a system that can not only maintain those critical space assets that we use every day, but also inherently gives you the ability to go to the planets when you have that. So I am cognizant of the fact that we're in serious fiscal trouble. We've been in serious fiscal trouble for my entire adult life, but we've continued to spend money on space. We just haven't spent it in a focused manner with a clear strategic direction, and I think that's what's needed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, witnesses.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks.